Welcome to Cinema Chop Shop. Watch, chop, retrofit.
So, Farron's baseball season has come to an end, and Sunday is the season-ending party, and they're doing a kids versus parents game.
Yes.
All week we've been talking shit about, you better hope they don't let me pitch to you, because I'm going to strike you out, so... Next time I'll come in here and tell y'all how I took this little motherfucker to the yard.
Yes. But this is not a Sandlot podcast.
No, it's Cinema Chop Shop. It's a movie podcast, but we've talked about baseball movies before, but just not today. We do this thing every couple of weeks, and we're glad you joined us. I'm your host, Shawn. I've got Joey Poole, as you heard off the top.
Joey, does your son know that your impression of him makes him sound like a sniveling little bitch?
I don't know. If he really pisses me off, I'll do it in front of him, and that does kind of set him off, so maybe. Yeah.
We got Todd.
How's it going, fellas?
And we've got Travisito.
I'm here as well.
Awesome. The soup du jour is against our idiom. It's against our charter. It's against our mission statement. We're talking about sequels that are better than the first movie. In general, we are against sequels and remakes, but there are exceptions to the rule, and today we're going to plumb the depths and talk about some films that are better than their predecessors. And
we were having me and some of my coworkers were having a conversation about it just because this episode was coming up, and we're trying to think of examples. And so, like, some that we're not going to be talking about specifically today, I would say Terminator 2 is a superior film to the original Terminator. I would give Christmas Vacation higher marks than Original Vacation. For sure better than European Vacation.
I'll give you European Vacation. I disagree.
Original Vacation is pretty good, though.
Yeah.
Pretty good on its own. But do you watch Original Vacation every year?
I don't watch Christmas Vacation every year.
Oh, I do.
I do too, but
yeah.
But I may like vacation. But it's got the advantage of having a major holiday.
That's true. But people go on vacation all the time.
That's true.
They should just run it 24/7 on the hotel channel.
Yes.
You're on vacation. Here's vacation.
But what are some others you guys could think of?
Well, originally I was going to do The Dark Knight, Batman Begins, which I can't really speak to because I have, as of yet, not seen any of those films.
Oh,
but
okay.
Apparently the Dark Knight is better.
I think it is.
I think it is too.
Yeah, for sure.
Just based on Heath Ledger alone, his performance is fucking out of this world. His performance was so fucking hard, it killed him. What about, now this, I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but what about Godfather 2?
That's one that you see on these lists.
Okay.
I actually have not seen Godfather 2. That's
okay.
It's actually on my list for this category.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Okay, it's a different film.
I've only seen them back to back, like one going into the next. So for me, parts of it kind of bleed together. I don't know. I don't know if I would say that Godfather 2 is better. It is the first time that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro were in the same movie, even though they don't appear on screen together.
Right.
One that I thought of that actually you really don't see on these lists, but I think is really underrated movie is The Omen 2, Damien, where now
I thought that's what
it's
you were
hard to
gonna
say
do.
that it's a better movie than the first one. I almost did that, but I was like, can I really say it's better than the first one? But it's a cool movie, though, if you've never seen it, because Damien is hitting adolescence, and he doesn't know yet that he's the Antichrist, and he's starting to find it out, and so it sort of parallels this adolescent awakening coming into his own. He's not pure evil, at least not at first. You kind of sympathize with him a little bit at times, and I think it's really well done. I think it's a pretty underrated horror sequel.
So why are sequels the exception to the rule, like better sequels? Why is it that sequels so often are not as good as their predecessor?
Well, typically it's money driven.
Yep.
So
Cash grab.
oftentimes you have a cash grab, and several times you do not have the original creative team on the sequel.
So many of them are like the one I'm going to talk about today, but I'm actually going to argue it's better, but I think it kind of makes light of this. But so many of them are just kind of like a rehash kind of the plot that worked before and don't really do anything to like further the
Yep.
That's another
The story or the world building.
I think the ones that are good, or even if they're not better than the first one, but are just plain good, are ones where it's part of the director's vision. Mm-hmm. It's not just a cash grab. It's something that fits into whatever world it is that they've created. Sometimes they've had the sequel thought out in advance or sketched out in their minds. But even if not, they don't rush out and necessarily just try to cash in. They take their time with it, wait to come up with a good idea. One that's coming out that I'm excited about, they're doing a sequel to It Follows.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was talk about it for years, but the director, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was resistant to it.
Yeah.
But then he came up with an idea that he really liked, and so they're going to do it now, 10 years after the first one. So
Well, I hope it's good.
Yeah, me too.
I heard today they're doing a sequel to Talk to Me, but it's called Talk to Me with a 2 in the middle. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that the Filippo brothers are doing it. They've got a new movie coming out also called Bring Her Back, something
Bring Her
like
Back,
that.
and they did an interview with the last podcast on the left guys, and they're a delightful.
Oh yeah,
they're hilarious.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're really funny. The directors.
There was also a situation going back to the director's original vision, where maybe they didn't have the budget in the first movie that they have in the second one, and so they were able to more fully flesh out more world building with that larger budget.
Yep.
I'm thinking like Mad Max, the first, the second Mad Max, Road Warrior, right? The second one is called the Road Warrior, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, it is Road Warrior, and then the third one is the one Thunderdome. Yeah.
But Mad Max, the first one, was super low budget.
Yeah.
And the second one, the Road Warrior, kind of repeats some of the same structure and themes as the first one, but with a much larger budget. And that budget continues to escalate in that series.
And they were able to have that pretty cool bicycle helicopter thing. Remember that?
Yeah,
that was pretty
exactly. Awesome. Do we think that the second Mad Max movie is better than the original?
A lot of people say that.
Okay.
It's
obviously Thunderdome's the best.
I like the first one, but I mean, I can understand why, because it is so low budget that there's just this very no frills, just kind of.
It doesn't really read post-apocalyptic as much as the second one because of the budget. You've got a motorcycle with like an armor plate. It's like where's the death cycle? Where's the those machines of just total destruction?
Right.
And that's a good example of where money helps. But then you've got sometimes where it works against it, where too much money makes it just weighty, heavy, just a giant albatross. And it doesn't have that same fire and that same magic oftentimes that the original did, because it had some sort of, can-do attitude or an independent vision kind of thing. Yep. So it can go both ways, but we're talking about the ones that worked out.
Obviously, the glaring example is ET2, the extraterrestrial.
All right, so we're going to kick things off. Joey, we're going to let you go first with yours. Please tell us, what is your original and what is your sequel, and get into it.
All right, so this is a bit of a controversial pick here, so I'm putting on my edgelord provocateur hat. But this is not pure provocation, because I really do believe that the oft-maligned sequel to one of everybody's favorite popcorn blockbusters is actually a better film, and I'm talking about Gremlins and Gremlins 2.
The new batch?
Yes. There's already skepticism. I'll tell you, it's a wildly unpopular opinion.
I'm skeptical, and also pretty much everybody that I've even mentioned this to has just been aghast.
I'm going to argue why they are wrong.
Okay.
The general consensus is that the sequel does not live up to the first one. Rotten Tomatoes, which everybody knows is the arbiter of cinematic taste, also agrees. The first film has very high 87 tomato meter and 79 popcorn meter score, and both of those go way down for Gremlins 2, down to 71 and 59 respectively. But I'm going to explain why. I prepared a rubric actually.
Okay.
To explain why. Wow. Gremlins 2, which is, as my long-held belief, is the superior film. So I'm going to skip most of the recap on this one. Everybody's seen Gremlins, right?
Yes.
We'll skip the detailed plot summary. A traveling salesman buys a cute little mogwai, which is more or less like a less frightening real-life Furby from a Chinatown curio shop.
Think Baby Yoda before Baby Yoda.
Exactly, yeah, with fur. As a last-minute Christmas gift for his son, comes with a list of instructions. Don't feed it after midnight. Don't get it wet, etc., etc.
Don't touch it down there.
Yeah, definitely don't do that. Lo and behold, those things happen, and which causes it to asexually reproduce, giving birth to a bunch of animatronic demons, which then get loose and wreak havoc all over the town with a surprisingly high body count, actually, for a film like
it was almost rated R.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is a great movie. I've watched this. I watched this in the theaters when I was a kid, and I've seen it a few times since then. I introduced my son to it a couple years ago. It's great. I mean, it's a dark comedy. It's darker in tone, and it's a touch closer to horror than you might think for.
It's Joe Dante.
Yeah, that's where his bread is buttered.
Exactly, and. What else is there to say about Gremlins, the first movie Gremlins? It is what it is.
Go back and listen to our episode from a few Halloween Octobers ago.
Yeah.
Where we talked about knockoffs. We did the Gremlins knockoff episode.
We did Ghoulies, yeah.
And Critters.
Yes.
So Gremlins 2, also directed by Joe Dante, 6 years later in 1990. Also still starring Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates as our leads. It basically takes the Home Alone 2 formula, where it takes the same characters, the general plot formula from the first movie, transposes it to New York City. Bigger budget, more action. Gizmo gets loose this time after the curio shop owner dies. And slimy developers, played by Robert Picardo of Star Trek Voyager fame, destroy the shop, and then Gizmo gets caught by a genetic research firm where one thing leads to another, and Gremlins wreak havoc all over New York City.
Hold on. So you're telling me that after The Next Generation had already been a thing, they hired an actor whose last name was Picardo?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Continue.
Yeah. So this is a film that is it takes very much the same tone as most sequels do in that, but it does it in such a way that I'm convinced that it is satirizing and parodying the sequel itself by being bigger, dumber, more explosions, and it does it in a smart enough way that I ultimately think that it is a better movie. I have prepared a rubric of 4 items here, which I have scored the sequel better than the original. The first one is an entertainment factor. This is an 80s blockbuster popcorn franchise. The most important thing that it has to do is entertain the audience. Both of them do very well at that. They do exactly what you want them to do. I give the sequel the nod here because it's funnier and it's over the top, and maybe just because I haven't seen it quite as many times as I have the original, I enjoyed it better upon recent rewatches. Tone is a lot different in this one, as I said earlier. And the original is kind of cutesy and deceptively dark, sort of a light-hearted horror comedy. The sequel swerves way further into comedy than the original was, and it does that while it's paying homage to horror classics of the past, so it kind of does both of those things. But here's what the kicker for this one for me. It kind of embraces its own ridiculousness in a way that clearly seems to parody sequel conventions. And there's even this scene where there's a fourth wall break, where the film starts to break down as if it were coming off of the reel-to-reel. And then the movie disintegrates, and that's the way that they transition into a theater scene where the gremlins are wreaking havoc in the projection room. And Todd, you'll appreciate this. The Hulkster has to talk them down, basically, to try to get them out of the...
Don't they have Leonard Maltin, like, playing himself also?
Yes, there's a scene where that happens later in the movie. The sequel wins that one for me. One of the things that I like about these movies is a category that I have called Gremlin Death, Creativity, and Spectacle.
Okay.
One of the cheap thrills of both of these movies is watching these little motherfuckers die, and they do so in very gruesome, comical ways. The best Gremlin death scene admittedly, is the microwave scene
Yes.
in the original one. So that is the best individual gremlin
I'm
death.
so glad you said that
definitely.
because I was thinking the same thing.
But that said, the sequel way ups the body count. I don't think it ups the body count. The human body count is actually lower in the sequel, but the gremlin body count is much higher in the sequel. And it has a couple of humdingers of its own. And my favorite ones of those is there's a flying gremlin who gets covered in wet cement and then flies to the top of a building where he hardens into
A gargoyle.
a gargoyle.
Yeah.
Love that scene. And then finally, and this is the one for me that I think throws it over the top. This is a category I've called gremlin personality and character exploration. In the first film, the gremlins are presented as somewhat intelligent, but they're nonverbal, kind of like hell-bent toddlers, if you will. In the sequel, they evolve into intelligent beings that are capable of speech. This happens, admittedly, after one of them accidentally ingests a brain serum created by Christopher Lee's Dr. Catheter. See, you're chuckling already,
Yeah.
right? But at this point, they clearly have a culture of their own, as they are not only capable of speech, but capable of doing complex musical numbers that parody iconic film scenes. We also learn a little bit more about their life cycle. There's a presence of a female gremlin whose name is Greta, and that to me implies that they can also reproduce sexually, which is something that I'm sure has been covered in gremlin fan fiction, but sadly I have not read enough of that to make the case. So for all of those reasons, and just for the fact that I personally like it better, it's a yuck fest more than the first one. Gremlins 2 is a superior film to the original Gremlins, and that is a hill that I will die on.
Wow.
Metaphorically, I'm not going to like really give my life for it or anything.
Bravo, Joey. You've really
Okay.
gone the extra mile.
All right, fun fact for Gremlins 2. In a deleted scene, the Gremlins release all of the animals in the, quote, Spice O' Life lab. During the filming of this scene, the monkeys in the lab set were genuinely so terrified of the gremlin puppets that they refused to leave their cages when their trainers,
shit, man.
when their trainers called for them.
That's awesome. Todd.
All right. So I'm going to go with the George Romero classic zombie franchise that began with Night of the Living Dead in 1968. Certainly was a groundbreaking and highly influential film. But 10 years later, 1978's Dawn of the Dead is probably the better movie.
Sorry to interrupt, but didn't it seem like watching those two films that there's a lot more than 10 years separating them?
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's I think a few reasons for that. Part of it has to do with the respective budgets they had to work with. Now, both of them had small budgets, relatively
Right.
speaking. But, I mean, the Night of the Living Dead was a shoestring affair all
Right,
the way.
like
So,
grassroots.
yep. So Romero worked for a company in Pittsburgh making industrial films and television commercials. He wanted to make a movie, and so he got together with some guys he knew. John Russo was one of the producers. They got some money together, about $114,000, which was roughly $1 million in today's money. And they didn't even know what they were going to do for the movie. The original idea was a horror comedy about adolescent aliens. And so there wasn't a clear vision going into it, which is part of the reason why I think that later on Dawn of the Dead is just a better movie. However, Night of the Living Dead, there's a lot of necessity being the mother of invention in terms of what they were able to do with that movie. Obviously, it became highly influential in its own right. But if you watch the movie, though, kind of objectively, you can see these guys are wet behind the ears. The dialogue's really clunky, something that Romero gets much better at as he gets more experience. In fact, they actually because they put the thing together just sort of, again, the idea evolved over time. So a lot of the dialogue was just kind of ad-libbed as they were, shooting the film, and not in a way that was, like Curb Your Enthusiasm or something where it's brilliant ad-libbing. The actors were a combination of just local Pittsburgh, like commercial actors that had been in some of the commercials. Some of them were just people that worked for the production companies. The guy that played Cooper, who becomes the adversary to Ben, the protagonist of the film, was the president of one of the two companies that were part of the production company. The woman who played his wife, Helen, was his actual real-life romantic partner. And the 9-year-old girl who played Judy and had the famous scene where she stabs her mother to death with a shovel was his actual daughter. So, again, long story short, the acting in this is not very good. Not particularly good for the most part. The exception to this is Dwayne Jones, who plays Ben, the protagonist of the film. Famously, the part was not written for a black actor, but he was just, Romero felt the best person to play the role. There's not really anything in the movie that's overtly racial. I mean, you could potentially argue that there's some of that simmering beneath the surface between Cooper and Ben as that whole thing plays out. But in any case, first off, the budget's smaller. Second of all, they don't have a lot of experience making a movie. They didn't have a clear vision going into it. The writing is clunky. The special effects, Tom Savini was off for the part originally, but he got drafted into the Vietnam War, so he did not participate in that. The blood was, chocolate syrup. Now, again, there is some necessity being the mother of invention, because there are some pretty cool effects given what they had to work with, but certainly not to the level we see later on with Dawn of the Dead. The soundtrack, I actually was surprised by this, because the soundtrack is actually pretty distinctive and creepy, but it was not original music. They got it from Columbia Records had a
catalog of
old movies, stock music. Some of them came from other movies, and so they had actually pulled some of the music from that. So it's not original. Now, to be fair, they selected well and picked a really creepy score, but it wasn't original. And so again, this is just kind of a shoestring budget. So if we get to fast forward 10 years. 1978's Dawn of the Dead. Romero's a veteran at this point. He's made several other pictures. None of them as successful as Night of the Living Dead, but a couple that I would argue are classics. The year before, he made a vampire movie called Martin. That's probably my favorite vampire movie. He did The Crazies, Season of the Witch, feminist film that I think is kind of underrated. So he had, sort of been really honing his craft in the 10 years since. He was resistant initially to go back to the zombie genre. First of all, this was another thing about the original movie where it was just kind of he didn't think of them as zombies. They're called ghouls in Night of the Living Dead, not zombies. He was influenced by Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, which is actually a vampire novel, but there's kind of these similar ghoulish elements to it. When we get to Dawn of the Dead, though, he's a veteran at this point, more of a craftsman. His script writing is improved tenfold. The dialogue in Dawn of the Dead is really sharp, really good. He adds a satirical edge to it, which isn't necessarily present in Night of the Living Dead. You could argue that there are some elements of satire in that film, but certainly not to the degree that we see in Dawn of the Dead. And it's sharp, satire about consumerism. The movie, if you've never seen it, the zombies all congregate in this shopping mall, and there's a lot of satirical scenes of the zombies just sort of wandering around and in what do you call the Belt version of Belk's? What do you call those types of stores? Department store, yeah. Wandering around department stores, stuff like that. Not really even seeming particularly scary, which that's the thing about the zombies in these movies, though, is that they're scary as a herd, not as individual. The other important element here, they did have more of a budget, although still small. So they got about $640,000, which was about $3 million in today's money. So I guess they tripled what they had from the first time. But the key element, the other key element here was Tom Savini's addition. Yeah. Because his makeup and special effects work is second to none. I would still say that nearly 50 years later has scarcely been surpassed. It has a very comic book element to it. The zombies have this bluish hue to them. Go ahead.
That applies to my fun fact. I'll just go ahead with it. Tom Savini chose the gray color for the zombie skin since Night of the Living Dead from 1968 was in black and white, and the zombie skin tone was not depicted.
Yep.
He later said it was a mistake because many of them ended up looking quite blue on film.
Right. But I think that gave it like this kind of neat comic book element that contrasts with the first movie that's very guerrilla style, almost a documentary feel of filmmaking, again, partly but out of necessity. The special effects are just, not realistic, but they're fun. There's a scene where a guy gets shot in the head and his head just explodes. There's a scene where a zombie climbs up on a crate to come after Flyboy, one of the characters in the film, and he stands up and the helicopter cuts his scalps him basically in a memorable scene. The music this time is so Romero knows Dario Argento at this point, and he hooks up with the goblins. Although they are shown that way in the Dawn of the Dead. Now, the one interesting tidbit is there were different cuts of this movie, and Argento did a European cut where I don't know if Europeans just don't have a satirical sense of humor or didn't at the time, but he didn't think it would sell well, all the satire. So if you watch that Italian cut, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the humor is cut out.
Interesting.
And it's played up more for the action and the horror elements. In any case, that Goblin score, though, is judiciously used by Romero, but he combines it with some more library stuff that he got that adds some comic flair when there's this sort of carnivalesque score that's going throughout the shopping mall when the zombies are, there's a Hare Krishna zombie famously in this film. So definitely the satirical edge is there, but the Argento cut, though, interestingly hyped up the Goblin score much more. So you hear more of the Goblin score than you do in Romero's cut, where he more judiciously picks and chooses when he's going to do it. But nevertheless, it's a great score by Goblins, which I think adds some of that modernity to it that you kind of alluded to and puts it in a completely different time and place. So one thing I would say that the original movie is hard to beat is that ending. So, of course, the ending of Night of the Living Dead, I'm just going to go ahead and give the spoilers, our hero survives the zombies, but then when he comes out of hiding, he gets shot by the crew that's out there to get rid of the hillbillies that are there to get rid of the or to kill the zombies, I guess, and to get rid of their bodies.
See, you said earlier that there's not like the racial elements like almost non-existent, but
that,
I always
that part,
wondered if that is
so. That part, especially at the end, because they show scenes of him being thrown on a fire with hooks. Mm-hmm. So you could certainly, Now Romero has always insisted, though, that wasn't really anything he intended. The ending of Dawn of the Dead is I like it. I think you couldn't do the same ending again. The original ending that Romero had planned was for Ken Foree's character, who later became a genre, kind of cult figure. His character and the female character who survives, who's pregnant, both are supposed to commit suicide in the original version. Him by shooting himself, and her by getting her head chopped off by the helicopter intentionally, which I guess is why they moved it to. And there was
kind of an elaborate way to kill yourself.
They actually went so far as to create a head device for her to use that they ended up using when they decided to change the ending with the guy's exploding head and the SWAT team scene when the guy gets shot and his head blows up. They end up going for a more optimistic ending, although it's certainly not a happy ending because, the apocalypse is kind of in full swing at this point. They're going off on their helicopter with, 30 miles worth of gas, and who knows what's going to happen to them
I'm still on this helicopter suicide. They've already got a gun.
Yeah.
There's a gun there because the guy shot himself. There's a gun. Why not just use the gun?
She wanted to make sure it took.
I guess, yeah.
She didn't want to mess up her pretty face.
Yep. And apparently there's still some scenes in the editing that were included when they were still going to do that ending. So it was like a late change. I think Romero was kind of talked out of it. And I think that was a good move because I don't think you want to do the same kind of ending twice in a row. What makes it so impactful in Night of the Living Dead is that you do not see that coming. Yeah. And if you do it again, it's just kind of like repeating yourself. So they actually go for what I think fits more the tone of the movie with that satirical edge, but also kind of the comic book flair of it. Ken Foree sits down like he's going to shoot himself and then says, you know what, fuck it. No, I'm not going to do it. And he shoots his way out, fights his way out, and that's kind of how that one ends. The follow-up to this, Day of the Dead, some people count that as their favorite. the third in the pictures. But overall, though,
I just
Dawn of the
raised my
Dead
hand
is,
as if people could see me.
but but as influential as Night of the Living Dead was, I think Dawn of the Dead is just a more polished movie with a director, auteur, who was just kind of more experienced.
He'd come into his own.
He'd come into his own a bit. He had, Tom Savini's key contribution there. The actors were still not experienced, but they were actual actors,
right,
versus most of the actors in Night of the Living Dead who were one of the actresses was just a receptionist at the production company. So
because 10 years later they could afford to pay actual actors.
Right. Dawn of the Dead, I mean, if some people prefer Night of the Living Dead, I can certainly understand it. It's a influential, great film. But Dawn of the Dead, I think, is probably the better film, one of the best horror movies ever made.
All right. Well, that takes care of two of us. We'll take a break, and we'll come back with the remainder, but not before we say, let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby and get ourselves some Twix. Because there's two of them.
That was solid.
Oh, thanks.
Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack. We promise to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, your sweet tooth. So visit our refreshment center now. Let's go.
And we're back. We all peed, maybe, some of us. I don't know. But it's a momentous day because Joey's brought a Sharon beer.
I have. This is a Galaxy Banger Hazy India Pale Ale from
Cool name.
Savage Craft Ale Works.
They're
You
in
know anything
Colombia.
about that?
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for marketing, especially if I've imbibed with the other chemical of my choice before I go to the Mickey Fins. And so,
Good label art.
yeah.
Looks cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I will get some Foley. That was kind of a weak Foley sound on there. And
Foamy.
I'll pass
you'll
it
need it?
around.
That is...
It's hazy.
It is
Yeah.
hazy. It's got all kinds of stuff floating around in it.
Particulate.
A little bit. It's pretty decent.
Yeah.
It's a little light on the carbonation. That's my only knock
Yeah.
on it. Could use a little bubbly. All right. Well, then we'll jump right back into it. I think Travis is up with his pairing.
So I'm kind of going with one that I feel is a go-to example of the sequel being superior to the original film. Not that I have any hate for the original film. I'm a big fan. But I'm talking about Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, versus Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Obviously, the release of the first Star Wars was a monumental occasion and pretty much changed going to the movies forever.
Yep.
We
We talked about that with Sorcerer, if you'll recall, because Sorcerer came out around
came out the
and-
same weekend.
Yep.
Yeah, it is responsible for the poor box office return of the movie Sorcerer that you can go back and listen to our whole episode about. So Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, in 1977. This one is directed and written by George Lucas. It's his baby. And we've got a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes. We had a budget of $11 million, a fairly modest budget. Go ahead.
Time out for just sorry to interrupt. Rotten Tomatoes scores. That's an aggregate of positive reviews. Like 94% of reviewers are positive. Who the fuck are these 6 people who are like giving bad reviews to fucking Star Wars?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like cinema, obviously, but dude.
Yeah.
Yep.
Who are these people? Like,
Were they
Well,
contemporary
everybody's-
reviews too, or because if they're holding out now, it's just
Yeah,
pure
I don't know. I
stubbornness.
don't know exactly, but
Yeah.
that's where we're at. Is a 94% on a budget of $11 million and a box office return of around $775 million. One of the highest-grossing movies of all time. For if you've never heard of it, Luke Skywalker joins forces with a Jedi Knight and a cocky pilot, a Wookiee, and 2 droids to save the galaxy from the Empire's world-destroying battle station, the Death Star. while also attempting to rescue Princess Leia from the mysterious Darth Vader. I rewatched this today, despecialized, so it doesn't have all that bullshit they put in, that Lucas put in later. They say Princess Leia, and they also say Leia.
Leia, yeah.
It's weird.
Well, and she speaks in a British accent sometimes, too.
Sometimes,
So.
yeah. Obviously, her real accent, she was faking the American accent. So then, 3 years later, we've got the follow-up, Star Wars Episode 4, The Empire Strikes Back. Yes, go ahead.
Episode 5.
I'm sorry, Episode 5. I'm bad at Roman numerals.
What did-
1980.
What did people make of the episode 4 thing in 1977? Because that had to be really
It was a head scratcher.
confusing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Did they use? Well,
They
I
did.
thought that was a later.
Nuh-uh.
So
No.
it was part of the.
They
was part of
definitely
it.
had
So-
that in the original scroll, the crawl.
In the
Yeah.
original
Oh, right,
press,
yeah,
was there any indication that, hey, y'all, this is the planned...
Yeah, Lucas talked about it in interviews and stuff. So it was one of those things people were like, what's the deal with this? Because he wanted to have that whole serialized feel to it.
Yeah.
Like it was an ongoing
Yeah,
thing.
and you're just jumping on board. And so he's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to make 9 of these things.
And it
And
was
a fuck ton
also
of money.
up to the theaters how much they wanted to market that as well. I'm sure a lot of theaters just put Star Wars on the marquee. Yeah, you've got The Empire Strikes Back that comes out 3 years later. This time we've got a different director. We've got Irving Kershner is brought on as the director, who had just finished a movie called Eyes of Laura Mars with Faye Dunaway and Tommy Lee Jones. And so he was riding on the success of that. He would also go on, incidentally, he would go on to direct Never Say Never Again, which is both a remake and a sequel in the James Bond franchise. Of course, that story had been adapted already for Octopussy, I believe. And then they brought Sean Connery back for that. And then later he would do RoboCop 2 from 1990.
Isn't
Written
it?
by Frank
Isn't
Miller.
Isn't it true that Lucas didn't direct another film after Episode 4 until he did Episode 1, like 20-something years later?
Now that I don't know for sure.
he
but it's-
definitely was, producing and like the
Yeah.
Indiana Jones writing and stuff, but I don't think he actually directed anything after the first one until
Nothing's coming to mind, so
Yeah.
you're probably right.
He didn't direct Howard the Duck.
now Spielberg.
Yeah, Spielberg directed, he produced.
Yeah.
Also, you've got a different writers. You've got Leah Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan. Brackett was known as the queen of the space opera, and she had written a ton of science fiction short format. She co-wrote the screenplay for The Big Sleep along with William Faulkner. Kasdan is the co-writer of Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. He also co-wrote Return of the Jedi, The Force Awakens, going to the sequel trilogy, and Solo, A Star Wars Story, which I think gets a bad rap. I kind of like that
I
one.
like that one,
Me too.
He also wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Bodyguard in 1992.
Really?
And he was the writer-director of Body Heat in 1981, The Big Chill, which is a classic.
Now, Body
in
Heat was De Palma,
1983.
right?
Excuse me?
Brian De Palma directed that one, right? Body
It
Heat.
says he's the writer-director of Body
Oh,
Heat,
huh,
1981.
I'm thinking of Body Double, I think.
Then Silverado, he comes back with Kevin Costner and actually puts Kevin Costner in the movie for Silverado. And then The Accidental Tourist in 1988. This one's got a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is fishy to me because I think it's pretty much universally agreed that it's a better movie than A New Hope. Go ahead.
I think that something I was going to say earlier, and I think this is the case with Dune. I would argue that that's another one where the sequels, and I'm referring to the Denis Villeneuve ones. The sequel's better, but they're both good. But the first one has to do so much world building.
Yeah, okay,
that
and I'm
the
going to
second
get to
one's a
that as
better
well.
Movie.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the phenomenon that's happening here too.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I point out. I don't have it broken down into a grid with criteria and different point values, but I do love the mindfulness on that. I do cite some evidence though, but first, the plot of Empire. After the Empire overpowers the Rebel Alliance, Luke Skywalker begins training with Jedi Master Yoda, while Darth Vader and bounty hunter Boba Fett pursue his friends across the galaxy. All right, so several bits of evidence that Empire is better than New Hope. One, better dialogue. The movie just has better lines, and that's due to the script that was co-written by Brackett and Kasdan. It's just superior to the writing that Lucas did on A New Hope. Number two, Irvin Kershner got much better performances out of the actors than George Lucas did. Love George Lucas, love his ideas and his world building, but I get the impression he's not the easiest person to relate to and collaborate with. Irvin Kershner got solid performances out of his actors. Which brings us to number three, character development. It goes way beyond A New Hope because it doesn't have to worry about playing setup. It doesn't have to give us all of the exposition of this world that's already been established in the first movie. Next, we've got higher stakes, much higher stakes in this. Of course, the end of A New Hope is awesome, but there's never really a question that the good guys are going to win. You pretty much know how it's going to work. Farm Boy is going to make the shot and blow up the Death Star, and everybody's happy, and they have their big ceremony with the medals. Why didn't the Wookiee get a medal? He was just as helpful in all of this. He's on stage with them. Is it because he's not human? Is it a race thing? Next, much more consistent pacing. I think that the you've got acts in Empire versus in A New Hope. It kind of dredges along and then big climax. You've got the distinct acts of the Hoth in the first act, the ice planet, which is super cool. Then you've got Dagobah, which was completely new. We're seeing this alien environment. Looks a lot like Oregon, so as a kid, it was like my backyard. Also, the scenes on the with the Emperor, the Emperor being introduced, and the saber duel with Vader. We get that. The higher budget we talked about before, which is pretty much the case in all of these. We've got a much higher budget, so they could do more special effects work and increase production value all around. Now, when I say special effects, it's still mostly practical. They were kind of pioneering in terms of green screen or blue screen they had at the time, but we're still talking mostly practical effects. They could just afford to do more of it. Number 7, John Williams' score. The original score is fine. It's perfectly acceptable, but he, like everybody else on this project, took it to another level, went above and beyond. The score is outstanding. Then we've got number 8, bringing in Frank Oz from Jim Henson's studios. He wanted Jim Henson to come in and be the puppeteer of Yoda, but he was unavailable. He was too busy doing Muppets and Sesame Street. So they bring in basically his second in command, Frank Oz, who not only does the puppetry of Yoda, but also the voice of Yoda. Which brings us to the introduction of all of these new characters. Yoda, for example, being one fan favorite. You've got the introduction of Boba Fett, who would go on to spawn the whole Mandalorian spin-off thing, even though he is not the same Mandalorian as in The Mandalorian. And the introduction of the Emperor.
And Lando.
The
only black man in the galaxy.
Yes. Then you've also got a better finale. Number 9, better finale and cliffhanger ending, literally, in one case. We've got Cloud City, which is just a beautiful spectacle of a set. And then Han Solo being frozen in carbonite. We don't know what his fate will be as he's shipped off to Jabba the Hutt. And then finally, the most important reason that Empire Strikes Back is a superior film is the big reveal. We take it for granted now that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. But people who walked into that fucking theater in 1980, they didn't know that.
I was one of them.
They did not know that the big reveal was that the arch villain was our hero's father, and that was like earth shaking at the time.
Yeah, it's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of like in, everyone knows the famous Psycho moment now in the shower. Right. But, it's easy to forget how
shocking
and
I mean, everybody always says that the Darth Vader scene is his shower scene, George Lucas's shower scene. Yes.
Now I'm thinking about George Lucas in the shower, and now I feel bad.
What must it have felt like to watch Empire Strikes Back in the theater in 1980 without knowing that Star Wars would go on to have many, perhaps too many sequels?
Oh yeah,
it was pretty awesome
because the Empire fucking wins, though.
It was
pretty
pretty awesome. I'm lucky enough to have seen every Star Wars movie in the theater,
and
Empire was the shit.
And the title alone does kind of give away that the Empire's going to have the upper hand. But just going against that type of the good guys always win in itself kind of makes it a more dynamic film.
Yeah. Do you think that, I wonder if the pacing issues you mentioned with the first one, or maybe not issues, but just more deliberate pacing, had to do with the world building aspect, that there are actually 3 other movies or whatever you want to say that we don't see in the, so there's a lot of like introduction that has to be done to who these people are, and maybe that kind of slows the pace down, whereas in Empire it's just kind of like it starts like gangbusters. We already know a lot of these people.
They don't have to depend so much on the world building and the character development. And,
well, I think Star Wars, the Episode 4, to its credit, though, there is a lot of just tossing out lines about various places without exposition, like I'm going down to Toshi's station to pick up some power converters.
Yep.
Where's Toshi's station? I did the Kessel run in part. Where's Kessel? And
but it also adds to the wonder of it, because you're supposed to be in this
so I think
galaxy far away.
So a lot of the world building
that's actually smart.
Is
that's
assumed
smart
that you're just going to hear this line and you'll have your imagination of what it is.
Yep.
And so I think that that's one thing that it did have going for it. For me, I think Empire is just a better directed film, hands down. Kirshner is better at doing military stuff, which is why the Battle at Hoth is so good. He is better at action, which is why his lightsaber duel kicks Episode 4's ass.
Yeah.
It's just a better movie, hands down.
It's great. I'm being the age that I am, I'm not a huge fan of the prequel trilogy, but I am a Return of the Jedi apologist. I like Return of the Jedi.
I like Return of the Jedi too.
Yeah.
And I think that if people our age could watch the prequel trilogy without the stain of nostalgia for the first 3, then they wouldn't hate on them as bad.
I'm sorry, the Phantom Menace is a piece of shit.
There are some annoying things about them, but the story
best thing
arc
about that
is
movie
important,
was the poster.
and it's done. The story arc is done very well. The movies, they have some problems.
I rewatched them recently. Revenge of the Sith, I think, is a pretty solid movie. Phantom Menace is and always will be a flaming turd.
It's the biggest fumble job. You have Darth Maul, which is like the most iconic character in your movie, and you kill him off,
right?
Or seemingly kill him off,
yeah.
And very bashfully have to bring him back into canon later on because the fan demand was so high. How stupid do you have to be?
I do have one fun fact. George Lucas was so impressed by Frank Oz's performance as Yoda that he spent thousands of dollars on an advertising campaign to try to get him an Oscar nomination for Best Actor in a Supporting Role.
Oh, wow.
Lucas's campaign ultimately failed because it was felt that a puppeteer wasn't an actor. Lucas felt this wasn't fair to Oz, who honestly didn't care.
Is there not a Oscar category for voice acting?
No.
There should be.
Yeah, stunt people. Hello, that needs to be in there too. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good shit. All right, mine. I'm talking about Richard Linklater's trilogy, the Before trilogy, as it's called.
I love that we all did genre trash and you're doing cinema here.
Well, that's fine. This speaks to Richard Linklater's obsession with cinematic life cycles.
Big time.
He's played with this in other films where he
before Boyhood.
Boyhood takes place over the course of many years. This is kind of the same thing, starting in 1995 with the film Before Sunrise, starring Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. an exquisitely understated ode to the thrill of romantic possibility. The inaugural installment of the Before trilogy opens with a chance encounter between two solitary young strangers. After they hit it off on a train bound for Vienna, the Paris University student Celine and the scrappy American tourist Jesse impulsively decide to spend a day together before he returns to the U.S. the next morning. As the pair roam the streets of the stately city, Richard Linklater's tenderly observant gaze captures the uncertainty and intoxication of young love, from the first awkward stirrings of attraction to the hopeful promise that Celine and Jesse make upon their inevitable parting, which, of course, in the film they make an agreement that we're going to come back to this same spot next year. We're not going to talk to each other. We're not going to write. We're not going to phone. We're just going to arrive here and we're going to see each other. It is an indicator of everyone's age at the time this film was made. I'm assuming everyone's seen it.
I have not.
I have.
Okay. It's
I watched
good.
all three of them at once a few years
right.
ago.
Yeah.
but
It's a good movie. However, it does have the earmarks of a young writer, director who has ideas and philosophies. And I remember the shit that I was spouting off around the same age.
Right.
And it's like, man, it sounds really profound to me, but
Yeah,
but
the
then
dialogue is a lot of him bouncing some ideas around,
and then you look
know.
back on it and you're like, wow, boy, I was an idiot. And I can identify with that feeling that it's like the things that you think are profound really aren't. And that's the knock on this movie is
This
that
makes me not ever want
I
to watch
actually
Waking
like-
Life again.
But see, I actually like that element of the movie.
It's charming. It's charming
Yeah.
because you do have these two people who are essentially college age, and they're just shooting off all their bullshit to one another. And there are some really cool tracking shots in this that kind of set the tone for what this trilogy is like.
Yep.
And then, of course, the fluidity of time and the sands of the hourglass running out, and you're trying to wedge in all this experience before this finite moment. There's some good stuff there. But it's followed up 9 years later from 2004 with the film Before Sunset. Also, Richard Linklater and Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. However, in this film, Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy are credited as co-writers.
Yeah, so I think the last two films, and maybe even the first one to some degree, was a very collaborative process. Linklater's famous for letting the actors get involved in sort of the creative process and asking for their ideas.
What
and
a
that sort of thing.
slacker.
But I think in this one, it's very clear that Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy have a full understanding of who their characters are,
Yep.
and you can
Yep.
feel their contributions in the script.
Oh, yeah.
And
They've
that's-
both thought a lot about
yeah.
who these people
So this
are.
is what's going to make this movie better. Anyway, the synopsis. In the breathtaking follow-up to Before Sunrise, Celine tracks down Jesse, now an author, at the tail end of his book tour in Paris. With only a few hours left before his flight back home to the United States, the meeting almost a decade after their short-lived romance in Vienna, the pair find their chemistry rekindled by increasingly candid exchanges about professional setbacks, marital disappointments, and the compromises of adulthood. And impelled by the urgent sense of the transience of human connection, Before Sunset remains Linklater's most seductive experiment with time's inexorable passage and the way love can seem to stop it in its tracks. This one is in real time. That's another really cool thing. We've got essentially an hour and a half, 2 hours
Yep.
until he has to leave. And so the movie is shot to fill that real space in real time.
Because supposedly he has to catch a flight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he's written a book, and it's based on this experience that that the two of them had. And she shows up at the book signing. They talk to each other, and they have a great opening shot. This tracking shot works really well. This is the one where they walk from the bookshop to a coffee shop, and you feel like you're in Paris. I mean, you are obviously, but it is this great observation from a third party, just kind of taking in the streets of Paris. But also the dialogue is much more natural. It feels real, and they talk about, well, did you go back to our meeting place a year later? And turns out Ethan Hawke did, and she was going to.
Her grandmother
But
died?
her grandmother died,
Yeah.
and so she couldn't make it, and so they did not
And
reconnect.
there was no text messaging, so...
No, none of that business. And they were kicking themselves as with the benefit of adulthood and wisdom, they're kicking themselves. Why didn't we exchange numbers? That was really stupid of us and very naive. But
Let's come
now,
back
is he-
here next year at the same
Right.
time.
Now, I'm trying to remember. Was he actually still married? And there's that.
Yes.
So he's still married.
yes, yes. So this is where they kind of take a little bit of a look back at their lives in the last 9 years and compare notes, and you can feel this connection and this very much attraction. However, they know that the situation has changed, so maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Things are this, things are that, and it feels like a true adult relationship and a true adult conversation.
Yeah.
Versus the first movie where you just had these random snippets that were kind of meshed together to make a film. And I'm not going to go into much detail about the third one. I think Todd agrees with me. I liked it fine. It was a letdown for me.
I just found them much less relatable. There's like this upper middle class, or even maybe like ennui going on that I can't relate to.
I could
you know,
identify with a
vacationing in
lot.
Europe
I could identify with a lot of the issues that they had, but
and they were very unlikable, both of them.
They were unlikable people by this point, and that was a disappointment after being on this journey. But hey, some people are assholes, and some
be
people
life.
Some people grow into
Yep.
being assholes.
Right.
But for me, this is the second installment is the winner out of the bunch. It just feels so natural, and I think it may have to do with the fact that it is a very tight timeline, and they are presented as real time, which I think is a nice effect.
Well, and probably Linklater's process too, because they're all older, and so that's going to be reflected in what they bring to the characters. They're going to be taking their own adult experiences that they didn't have when they were, mid-20s or whatever they were, early 20s.
But again, credit to including the two main actors as collaborative writers on this, because that is what makes this one a cut above the first installment.
Awesome.
Yep.
So that's it. Those are our sequels. Fight us. At me, bro. Thanks for everybody for doing this. I think it was a fun little experiment.
It was.
And we might revisit this at a later date, as I texted, and then Todd kind of dogged me on it afterwards.
So it dawns on me that even though this is a category in the Cinema Chop Shop Movie Challenge, we all picked movies that
None
we've
of
seen
us.
before.
No, I picked the one. Well, I watched it for the challenge. So
Oh, okay.
self-servingly, I did not have to
Gotcha.
do any homework.
I still have The Dark Knight for that category.
Yeah, I've got-
Gotcha.
And I was going to do that one for the podcast, but I just didn't have
Time.
the time and or interest to watch two
Well, and
dark
also-
Christopher Nolan Batmans this week. So I will be watching those. I've been
Also, if you
resistant
hadn't
to
seen it
but-
before, you might turn out disagreeing. Like, I thought about doing
That's
The Godfather
true.
2, but then I was like, well, what if I like The Godfather 1 better?
Yeah, very good.
So I was just...
It does help to have seen this before
exactly.
committing.
Right.
All right, that's going to wrap us up. I think our next episode is going to be our Father's Day episode, Like Father, Like Son. Travis, you will not be with us.
Be out.
You'll be at a previous engagement. So that's the episode that's coming up. Rate, review, subscribe. Follow us on social media. We're Cinema Chop Shop everywhere except for YouTube and Blue Sky. We're Cinema Chop Shop Podcast. So check us out there. In the meantime, love your friends, love your family. Tell people you love them, let them know, and do kind things for others. And don't forget to
Watch, chop, retrofit.